Good, we are now recording. Okay, so what I'll do at the end of this session, the session that we're all in, this next hour, so from 10 o'clock till 11 o'clock, I'll record this and I will download the recording and upload again through YouTube and share with you again. Okay, so what we're looking at today is the proposal, your research proposal, and we are looking at the Viva. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen with you. If you, I need a volunteer. Leah, if you can't see the shared screen, Leah, just Leah, could you turn your mic on and let me know? Actually, if you can see my shared screen, Leah, could you also turn your mic on and let me know? I'm just about to do it now. Cheers, thanks, Leah, that's great. Because what I found is it's not always possible for me to, there we go. So I am, that's not what I want to share with you. Let me minimize that. Let me go into, so I am now in project on Moodle. Leah, are you seeing that? I'm going to unshare because I'm not getting a response there. Let me come back in again. Okay, great. Okay, great. So, Leah, can you? That's fantastic. I can't. I can only hear comments now if you unswitch. If you switch on your mic. But that's great. That's
sure.
Great. Thanks. Cheers. Thanks, Leah. I'll go back in there again. I think that's all okay. So I'm going back into what I see when I go into Moodle. So all of the information for this module for project is in Moodle on the VLE. Just a quick, let me go to the home page here. So that's your welcome, that's your landing page there. Everything is available from the landing page. If I go, we had a question earlier on about assessment and feedback, so I'm clicking there. And in the assessment and feedback section, you've got various bits and pieces, which I talked about last week, but I'm just going to flag up for you again here. So there is an overview of the assessment. So you've got these two elements. You've got the Viva and you've got the dissertation. So the Viva is the thing that you're going to be doing in January. It's basically a discussion, a prepared discussion that you are going to have with your dissertation supervisor. That's in January. And the second element is the dissertation, which is the report on your research, which you are going to hand in by the 12th of May. So two elements. I'm going to be talking about the Viva plan today. That's one of my main pieces of work today. There's the criteria for marking the plan, and this was an interesting document which I encourage you to look at if you're not sure about how to organise a dissertation. We talked about this last week. There is an overview of your dissertation with some indicative word counts. Indicative word counts. So if, for example, your introduction section is longer than 600 words, that is fine. Okay, it's not a problem. It's just to give you a rough idea about how big these various sections should be. What's important is that when you finish your dissertation, your literature review is pretty substantial. So 2,000 words out of the 7,500 words, and your results and discussion section is about coming up to half of the entire length of your dissertation. That's a really big chunk. You will have seen that Fabienne published a list of project supervisors, so you can look at that. Don't look at it now because I'm talking now. You can come and look at that a bit later on. This is last week's session. What is educational research? So if you go in there and go down. So if you missed last week's session, there's the introduction. There's a video there. there's the preparatory content there. I recommended that you looked at one or both of these journal articles to get a sort of flavour of what you are going to be doing for this module. And then in the live session, we talked about the assignment. That was last week. We talked about thinking about focus for your research, and we talked about finding research articles. And as promised, there is a video that demonstrates how to find journal articles using the LSBU library. So that's last week's stuff. So if you missed last week, catch up. That's important. Here's this week's stuff. So session 2, that's where we are now. That was my introduction. That's the preparatory stuff. So if you look through this stuff, you could look through either the Moodle book here or the PowerPoint here. And then what I said I was going to look at this week was 3 elements. One of them was around writing a proposal. So I'm going to go through that process and talk about the Viva and make sure that you're clear about how that works. I'm going to talk about research questions. We've already had a bit of a discussion with those who arrived before 10 o'clock. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about methodology, which will probably help you to shape up your ideas. So, first of all, I'm going to go back to the assessment and feedback area. And there, in that section, you can see Plan for Viva right there. So you can download that. I'll open that up here. And I'm going to go back and then I'll come back in again. And let me just share. I'm going to unshare for a moment. And then I'm going to open up specifically the plan for the Viva so that you can see what that looks like and see how that will prepare you for the meeting that you're going to have with your project supervisor in January. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to find, if I can find it, there it is. There we are. So, this is the plan for the Viva. So the Viva, V-I-V-A, Viva, is a discussion that you are going to have with your dissertation supervisor in January. And in that discussion, you're going to talk about your research question. You are going to talk about some of the literature that you've looked at to inform your thinking about your research question. You're going to explain why this particular research question is of interest to you or why it might be of interest to anybody else. You're going to start to talk about your research methods. So the research methods are all about how you're going to gather the data for your research. And you're going to roughly suggest some dates by which you're going to complete various sections of your dissertation. So that's kind of quite a lot of stuff to cover in the Viva. And what this document here does, this plan for Viva, this is basically you follow the various requirements of this plan, and you can take this plan into your Viva, into the discussion with your supervisor, and use this plan as an aid memoir. It's a document to remind you about the things that you want to talk about. And you can start to fill in this plan now. You can start to populate the various sections now and prepare for your meeting in January. So basically, this is a plan for a meeting you're going to have, and the plan covers all of the things that your supervisor will talk to you about. I'm just going to break there for a moment. I'm going to leave that opening section up there for you to look at. Okay, so you've looked at the top here. So the first box to fill in, it's this box here. So you're going to put in your research question there. And I've spoken to a number of you this morning, and a number of you have already got your research question or are very close to having your research question. So your research question is basically going to be the title of your dissertation. And you put your research question in there. Okay, that's that box filled. Probably ideally with a question mark at the end, because it's a research question. Ideally, it will have a question mark at the end. Okay. And then here, this is the beginning of a reading list, a beginning of a reference list that you can use to support your reading for this module. So what you're going to do here is you're going to put the reference, the full reference using the Harvard LSBU guidelines. So reference number 1, the book or the journal article number 1, the book or journal article number 2, the book or journal number article number 3 here, and over on this side you could use bullet points to say what's the significant thing that you've got from this particular book. What's the kind of idea that you're going to be using from this book? What's the set of facts or the information or the philosophy that you're going to take from text number 1? You put that in here. What's the kind of key points that you want to take from text number 2? You put that in here. What's the key information you want to get from text number 3? You put that there. Just bullet points is fine. You don't need to write in full sentences. Just kind of key points. Okay, I'm going to just stop sharing for a moment. I'm going to come back to the main screen. Nicole, for the purposes of the Viva, you only need to have 3 books or journals. That doesn't stop you from expanding your reference list at the same time. So obviously you're going to need a longer reference list for your dissertation, a much more substantial reference list. But for the purposes of the Viva, you only need to have those 3 core texts, or the 3 books that or journal articles that you have felt are important for you at that time. But yeah, of course, Nicole, you can expand that later on. Okay, any other questions about those first sections of the proposal plan? Excellent. Okay, so sharing again. So then the next section that you're going to fill in is this rationale. Now the rationale basically will become the introduction to your dissertation. So the rationale is the first substantial chapter of your dissertation, and we call it an introduction, and the introduction will present why you think this particular focus is of interest. So why should anybody read your research is what we're saying. Why is the thing that you are investigating interesting? Partly, why is it interesting for you? So it might be that your research focus has been prompted by your own experience in education. And that's a really valid reason. So your own experiences in education may have made you think about a particular aspect of education and you want to carry out research into that. So that might be the reason for your focus. It might be that you work in a particular setting and the learners that you work with and your day-to-day work has prompted you to do research into that particular area. Also within the rationale, I recommend you look at what the previous research is into this area and demonstrate, show that this is important beyond just you. Lots of people are thinking about the importance of this. So some of you were mentioning play in the early years. Play in the early years is something which lots of researchers have looked into. So you could use that as a justification for your interest, is that lots of other researchers have looked into this area. Meeting the needs of autistic learners, lots of research has been carried out into that. So that's partly a justification why you might be carrying out research into that area as well. So the rationale, and just note the spelling there, it's the word rational with an E on the end. So a rationale means a reasoning, an explanation why you think this is important or interesting. Okay. Now, the next section here, again, bullet points is fine. So that's bullet points there is fine, because remember, you're just using this as an aide-mémoire. You're using it as a way to remember what you want to say and discuss with your dissertation supervisor. So you just want to look at your sheet, take it into the meeting with you, have a look at it. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about that and that. So just bullet points, reminders to you about what you want to talk about with your dissertation supervisor. Proposed research methods. So I've talked with a number of you already about the idea of carrying out surveys or carrying out interviews. So those would potentially be your research methods. So the research methods is all about how are you going to gather the data, the information that will enable you to answer your research question. So let's take an example here. Let's come back to the main screen again. Let's say, for example, that your research is into, let's have a look up here at one of the suggestions we had here. Let's say that you are researching into teachers and parents' views on how 12 to 24-month-old children learn. Okay, that's what you're, so in a sense that's, we already know who the participants are going to be. The participants are going to be teachers and parents. You've worked out who your participants are. The next question is, how are you going to get the information from the teachers and parents? Are you going to get the information by meeting them face to face and having a conversation with them? We might describe that as an interview. Or are you going to send them something to fill in? So you could send them something like a survey, and they complete the survey and send it back to you. So your method would be survey. Think about COVID-19 and think about the challenges that sets for us. It may be that you cannot meet your participants face to face because of social distancing. Instead of meeting them face to face, you could, for example, send them questions via email, and they can respond to your emailed questions through email. So you send them the question through email and they respond through email. Effectively, this does the same thing as an interview. The advantages of that would be partly that you don't have to have the face-to-face meetings, so you avoid the issues around social distancing. Advantage number one. Advantage number two is that the interviewee, the person that you are interviewing, is setting out their own thoughts themselves. You don't have to transcribe the interview. The interviewee is already just has typed the words down. So there's no danger of you misunderstanding or misrecording what the interviewee has said to you. I note that the transcription here is picking up interviewee. So That's one word there, interview, I-N-T-E-R, V-I-E-W-E-E, interviewee, the person that you interview. So there's a real advantage there in thinking about perhaps using social media or using email as a way of gathering ideas from your participants. If you interview live, so if you interview in the same space with the participant, you're going to have to record that and transcribe what your interviewee has said. And there's a problem with that. It takes a long time to transcribe. Even a short interview, even a 10-minute interview takes a long time to transcribe. And you need to think about how you can manage your time effectively. I think we've got a couple of questions here. I've got a question here from Brooke. Can you also gather information from children in your setting? Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I would thoroughly recommend using children as participants. If you are using children as participants, you need to make sure that you have been clear with them about the purposes of the interview and that you have got their permission. And depending on the policy of the school, you have got the permission of their parents or guardians. And of course, you need to make sure with all of your participants that all of the data that you gather is confidential, and that when you're reporting on it, you maintain the participants' anonymity. For example, when I read your dissertation, I don't know who these people are. You're going to call them something like pupil A, pupil B, pupil C, pupil D, or parent A, parent B, parent C, or teacher A, teacher B, teacher C. So anonymity is a requirement. Okay, if I go back to sharing the screen again. So we're back into the plan for the Viva. So I've talked about the research methods here, and the research methods that I've been talking about, we've talked about surveys, talked about interviews. It might be that you could, you're already thinking about how you're going to carry out the interview, and that you might use face-to-face interviews. So if you're in a work setting already, and it's possible for you to safely interview colleagues in the workplace, that's absolutely fine. Look at your school policy, make sure you're not crossing any school policy boundaries there, social distancing boundaries. You could, of course, interview participants through using something like Teams. In the same way that I'm engaging with you today, you could engage with your participants using Teams. You could use WhatsApp or another social media platform to carry out interviews with somebody. If you've got an iPad, you could use FaceTime, for example, to carry out your interviews. So that's lots of different ways of carrying out interviews whilst observing social distancing. Or you could get the views of your participants by sending them questions, and they could respond to you through an email exchange. And obviously I've suggested that's a really good way of doing it, because then your participants write down their own ideas and you don't have to transcribe their ideas. You've already got that stuff, then they've transcribed it for you in a sense. A little bit of information here. So setting is, where do you intend to carry out your practical research? So it may be that you're carrying out your practical research, it's linked to a particular school, but actually you're carrying out your research using social media. So it might be that your focus, all of the parents are parents at the same school, for example, or all the teachers that you are getting data from are teachers at the same school, but actually you're getting the information using social media. So what is the setting or the settings where your participants work or where they are stakeholders? That's the setting bit. And then the final bit for your Viva section, for our purposes here, is this bit here. So everything that's grayed out don't put anything in there. The greyed bit is just headings. So ignore all the grey bits. Don't put any words in any of these grey bits. But here, I want you to put some dates in. You are not, I emphasize this, you are not going to be held accountable for these dates. These are just show that you've thought about the process. So we are asking you to propose dates of completion for the following sections of your dissertation. So propose a date for when you'll finish a draft of your literature review, propose a date for when you'll finish your draft of your methodology, a date when you'll finish your practical research. By practical research, I mean interviews, surveys, observations, whatever else you're going to be using, a date for completing your findings and your results section, and a date for your completed draft. My recommendation is that this final date, the completed draft date, is 1 month before the submission deadline. So your submission deadline is in May. I recommend you get a completed draft done by April, because that will give you a month to work on it, to perfect it, to improve it, to refine it. Okay, any questions about the form? Ali?
Quick question, Andrew. Just with regards to the form, do we have to include references as well?
Yes. Let me go back to the form. Just a minute, I'll go back to the form and just show you where that goes. Just a sec. So go back to the form. Back in the form, up the top here. So the only references you need are these 3 texts that you've identified to inform your thinking. So let's say you're looking at the needs of dyslexic learners, if that's your focus, okay? So your 3 texts will all be about dyslexic learners. There might be a textbook about dyslexic learners, there may be a journal article about dyslexic learners, and there may be perhaps a chapter in a textbook about SEN that focuses on dyslexic learners. So you'll put the full reference there, and you'll put the kind of key points that you're taking from these various sources in the space over here. If you want to add further references, for example, to the section on research methods, that's great, but that's not a requirement. Basically, you want to make this form help you when you come to your Viva. You're going to have a conversation that's going to last between 15 and 20 minutes with your supervisor. You will lead the conversation, and you need to be equipped for that conversation. And all of the questions that your supervisor will ask you will be answered when you fill the form in. So the supervisor will ask you, okay, what's your research question? Your supervisor will ask you, tell me about some of the literature that you've looked at. Your supervisor will ask you, what's your rationale? Your supervisor will ask you about research methods. Your supervisor will ask you about the setting, and your research supervisor will ask you about your plan, your submission plan, when you're going to complete the various sections. So all of the questions that your supervisor will ask will be, you can answer them in advance by preparing and completing the plan for Viva.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Nishanti.
Hi, Andrew. If you could go over the setting bit again, please.
Yes.
Let's say setting, and where do you tend to carry out the practical research? How will you get access, and who will be your participants? If you could just briefly explain that again, please.
Okay. So the setting in a usual year, in a kind of conventional year with no COVID-19, you would go into a school and you would interview teachers or pupils. You might go into a school staff room by arrangement with the school and perhaps interview a small selection of parents. So you'd be doing something in the school. And when I say setting, I mean, in most cases, it will be a school. If you work in a school, the setting will be a school. If you work in a nursery, the setting will be a nursery. If you work in an adult education institution or a further education college, the setting will be that college. If you're on a non-work-based route, the choices are a bit more, to a certain extent, the choices are a bit more flexible, because you're choosing the setting, you're choosing the interest that fascinates you, whether it's a primary school, an early years setting, secondary school, further education college, sixth form college, etc., etc. It's up to you. Because of COVID-19, for lots of us, it's difficult. It's much harder to get into the setting, but it's still, your research may still be focused on a particular setting. So, for example, Nishanta, you might want to carry out research into how a particular school in Southwark teaches pupils with dyslexia. So the setting is that particular school. You may not be able to visit that school in person because of COVID-19, but you can get data from teachers in that school by using something like a survey, or through email, or through arranging interviews through Teams or FaceTime or some social media platform. So the setting is basically where the learners are that you're thinking about. The school or the college or the nursery, where are they? It might be that you're not thinking about a particular setting. So it might be that your participants are a community. So it might be a community of your local community, and you're asking parents in your local community how they feel about something educational. So it won't be linked to a particular setting, but it will be linked to a particular community. So you could talk about the community as the setting.
Okay.
That makes sense, Shanta?
Yeah, that makes sense. So if I just interview the teachers and the parents within the workplace that I work in at the moment, that's okay?
Super.
Perfect. Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Andrew.
Setting. So your workplace is the setting.
Okay, yeah, yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
Cool.
you're correct.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Brooke, I've answered your question. Aisha, do we get to show our supervisor the draft in April before we start refining? Yes. So what you'll do through this process is that your supervisor will look at sections of your draft dissertation. And the way we do it is we look at up to 10% of the whole dissertation. So, for example, you could send your supervisor a chunk of your literature review, and your supervisor will give you feedback on that chunk of your literature review. And what you've got to do is take the advice on that chunk and apply it to the whole of that section. So we work with you on sections of your dissertation and give you feedback on those sections. Let me go back to sharing that document again. That's why it's useful for you to start talking with your supervisor about when you're going to finish these various sections. So let's say you said to your supervisor, okay, I'm going to get my draft literature review done by the middle of January. Then what you could do then is arrange with your supervisor to share the beginning of your draft, for example, of your draft literature review in January, get some feedback on it, and then you've got something to work on. Or you might want to write a couple of paragraphs of your literature review, maybe before Christmas, get some feedback from your supervisor on those paragraphs, and then use that feedback to make sure that you're organising the whole of your literature review effectively. Aisha, does that make sense? Nikki, can I contact my supervisor for advice on research before January? Yes, you absolutely can. Our next session is going to work slightly differently. So in our next session, session 3, there's 2 things going on. You will have your first meeting with your project supervisor in session 3. And because of making it work for you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together, I'm already putting it together. I'm going to put together some video input involving me and some other links to materials around research methods. So you can access all of the stuff that you need for session 3 online in your own time, but session 3 itself is going to be set aside for tutorials with your supervisor. So you're going to meet your supervisor, discuss where you're going with your thinking, get some feedback from them, come out of that meeting feeling confident about your research, and then carry on. And then on the same day or before or after, you can access the resources to do with session 3 through Moodle. Georgia, how many do we have to interview roughly? It's depends on what your focus is, Georgia. So as I've mentioned before, if you are, let's say that I was doing a piece of research and my research was about how a particular school manages the needs of one particular pupil who has a number of interrelated special educational needs. Okay, so I'd need to interview that pupil's class teacher, that pupil's TA or learning support assistant. I might want to interview the special educational needs supervisor, special educational needs coordinator in the school, and it might be appropriate also to interview the pupil, and it might be relevant to interview the pupil's parents. So that's with a very focused piece of research. I might have 3 or 4 or 5 interviewees, all focused on that one particular pupil. Another way of thinking about it, Georgia, would be surveying a larger group with a simple survey, which you could set up using the Bristol online survey mechanism. I'll give you some links to that later on. So you might survey, let's say, 20 pupils about their views about something, or all of the teachers in a particular school about their views about something. So get some big data from all of the teachers. And then I might do 3 or 4 or 5 interviews with a selection of those teachers. So I get a big picture and I get some more focused feedback from a small number of focused participants. George, let me know if that makes sense. Aisha, it's 10% of the whole dissertation, so that's 750 words. The way I would take it was I'd say, okay, what about, I would recommend maybe 300 words of your results and discussion section, about 200 words of your literature review section, about maybe a little bit of your methodology section. So little chunks of different sections. But if you want to, there's nothing stopping you giving the whole of your of a particular section of kind of your introduction section. I don't think that would be the best use of your supervising tutor's feedback. Safia, in regards to meeting our supervisor in January, yeah, well, unless suddenly they find a cure for coronavirus, we all get an injection and no one's worrying about social distancing anymore, it's going to be via MS Teams. So it'd be face-to-face via MS Teams, like this. For our meeting it's not next week, Bernadetta, it is, let me just check when it is. It's not next week, it is on, so it's session number 3 for project, which is, let's just find out where that is to make sure you're clear. Thursday the 22nd of October. Okay, so Bernadetta, so project is divided up a little bit more. It's spread out over the 2 semesters. So this is session 7, sorry, session 2. The next session is going to be on the 22nd of October. So that's when your meeting with your supervisor is going to be. Okay, great, thank you, Georgia, thanks, Aisha. Sabrin, I also wanted my project to be based on autism. Okay. I know some family friends who have children that are autistic. Okay, can I interview them and use them as part of my research? You can, as long as you make sure that you get permissions. You find a way of getting. If you're interviewing parents, make sure that they're clear. Observe all of the ethical elements that you have to organize these things. So think about anonymity and making sure that all of the data that you gather is securely held. Can I interview them and use them? Yes, you can. I also wanted to interview teachers from special schools. Is that okay for me to do? So if I am yeah, of course. Yeah, make contact with a school. It may be if you're on the non-work-based route, it may be that you already have a link with a school for either from your AES placement in year 2 or from the placement you did as part of LLL in year 1. So you could use links that you've already got. It may be if you're on the I know that a number of you on the non-work-based route have got links with schools because you already spend some time working there in schools. So you could use a school that you work in. Work-based and top-up students is a bit more straightforward for you because I know that you definitely have, you're definitely working in an educational setting. Aisha, can you please put the recommended word count? Aisha, it's on Moodle. So let me just show you again recommended word counts. Let me go back and share my screen again. I'm going to go back into, how do I do this? Back into project again. So I'm back in project again now. So I'm into the section here called assessment and feedback. And then it's this link here, dissertation structure and indicative word counts. So when I click on that link, it takes me to this window. So there are all my word counts there. Okay. So you've got 10% of so the entire word count is 750. Sorry, 7,500. So 10% of that is 750. So you could consider maybe just sort of, I mean, you'll get a chance to talk about your introduction because you'll be talking about your rationale in your Viva. I'd suggest you do need to send a bit of your literature review and part of your results and discussion section to your supervisor. But I'm going to go through and give you some models for these various sections and what the content of these sections look like through the sessions of this module. Okay, great. Any other questions about the Viva form? Okay, I'm just going to go briefly back to the Moodle site again. Back we go here. We're in session 2. I just want to check that I've done all the stuff that I need to do that I promised I would do in this session. Writing the proposal. Okay, we've had a discussion. I've talked about that and I've answered some of your questions. Thinking about revising your research question. We've sort of done that as we've gone through, but I'll come back to that now and beginning to think about methodology. I've talked quite a lot about methodology. So methodology is this. So methodology is when we're thinking about how you are going to gather the data that will inform your thinking and answer your research question. So the data is the responses you get from your participants. So if you're interviewing, the data is what the interviewees say to you during the interviews. If you're doing surveys, the data is what the responses to the surveys are. Okay, so that's your data. And I've talked this week particularly about surveys and interviews. A couple of you have asked me about observations, and I've done a short video about observations, which you'll see in the materials for session 3. I'll release those early next week. Observations are tricky, particularly at the moment because of COVID, because observations require us to be in the learning space with the learners as a rule, and it's not going to be so easy to do that. But observations are also problematic because there's so much to observe, and so much of what we observe is our interpretations of what we're seeing get in the way sometimes. And I talk about that in a video that you'll see from next week. So I'm pushing you towards considering interviews and surveys as principal ways of carrying out your research. And both of those methods work particularly well given the social distancing requirements that we're having to deal with at the moment. Ruhena, in terms of the literature review, do you want us to summarise our core texts or discuss how and why? Yeah, so it's much more about why they are relevant to your research question. And I don't want you to write loads and loads there. So your supervisor will say, okay, Ruhena, tell me about the literature that you've looked at. And you'll say, well, I've looked at this book called such and such and such by this author. And then your supervisor will say, okay, tell me a little bit more about how that particular book relates to your research question. And you'll go, oh, well, this book relates to my research question because the author talks about this and this. So your conversation with your supervisor will be about the literature and how it relates to your research question. So it's very much the second thing you said, not the first thing. Asier, I will be talking about second language and how this affects children in educational settings. I work, yep. So therefore, could I set up a survey and tell my colleagues to complete this as they speak? Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Just remember, try and avoid looking at this direct relationship between this and this. This is about impact. So I say you use the word affect there. Instead of saying that, think about their perceptions about how this thing affects this thing. So rather than looking at the direct effect or impact, ask about what they think. How do they think that second language in fact impacts on children's learning? And Asier, you might want to also consider whether so you're talking about second languages, and you might want to think about what the first language of these learners are, and if it's the same as the first language of your colleagues. So some really interesting thoughts you could have about, whether lots of the pupils speak Bengali, for example, and the teachers are also Bengali speakers, or lots of the learners are Turkish speakers and the teachers are Turkish speakers. Think about the kind of relationships between the first language and the second language there. Okay, so a little bit about methodology. We've talked in detail about the Fiverr form. Somebody's got their mic on. So somebody's doing a lot of big page turning at the moment. If you could just switch off your mic, just check you've got it turned off, that would be really great. Nikki, can I use more books, journals, articles to research my report, include them in my report and reference them at the end? Yes. So the references you use for the Viva, 3 only. That's just the Viva. When it comes to your actual dissertation report, you're going to have loads more references. Your reading will have expanded hugely. So for the dissertation references list, you're going to have loads of references, but for the Viva, you only need to have the 3 references, and you can use those 3 sources beyond the Viva. But for the Viva, you've got to have prepared three sources and know what they're about, know how they relate to your particular focus. But absolutely, Nikki, then you expand your reading and you look more broadly at journal articles and reference books, etc., etc. Yeah, I'll put up. I was going to put up a Padlet this week, Sam, but I thought actually that because I'm answering so many of these questions now in the live sessions, that it would be okay. But I'll put up a Padlet with further questions about this later today. Fiverr reference, can journals be, journals, books, whatever, as I said before. So if you look at the form, let's see how clear it is there. Not that one. Look at the form. Look at the form. Yeah, it doesn't say specifically. I mean, any text. When I use the word text, it means journal, book, etc., etc. I think, Samantha, I think people are asking individual questions anyway, and you're welcome to ask individual questions as well. Yes, Israel, you can just use journals. So you could just use journals, you could use books, or you could use chapters of books. So you could use journals entirely, you could use books entirely, you could use chapters from books entirely, or you could use a mixture of those. Good. Okay. So we talked about methodology, we've talked about literature, we've talked about journal, about dissertation questions. If you've got a question about your particular dissertation focus, so Samantha, this is slightly addressed to anybody with your kind of question, that needs to go to your supervisor. So you will negotiate your specific dissertation question with your supervisor. Okay, so that's the person to come to an agreement with around your dissertation focus. So the questions that you can ask on the Padlet will be, to a certain extent, will be more generic, because that Padlet will be seen by everybody, and I will try and make my responses to questions on the Padlet as generic as possible. But if it's a question about your specific focus, that's the thing that needs to go to your dissertation supervisor. Yes, government websites is fine. Think in terms of government documents. So a lot of government documents now appear set out on government websites. But so Nicole, think about government websites, but think about a balance as well in your literature, particularly for the proposal. Show that you haven't just used government websites. Use a balance of, perhaps a website and other sources. Okay. Any other questions? I'm about to turn off the video because I've gone through all the stuff I would go through. I'm going to remain online to discuss any individual questions. So, Sam, if this is a good opportunity for you to ask me any individual questions, that's fine. But it'll be a shared discussion with anybody else that's remaining on the call. Just going back to the project site again, just to double check. We talked about methodology. We talked about research question. We talked about the proposal. Good. So I've done all the stuff I said I was going to do. So I'll remain on here. I think I've picked up all of the questions from people who have been on the call. Let me just check on. That's great. We've had 68 in the meeting. That's really good. And I'm just checking if. Yeah. Okay. Good. So what I'll do at the end of this, I'm going to stop the video recording now. I'm going to have a 3-minute comfort break. And then I'm going to come back. So I'm going to leave this live, but I'm going to stop the video. And then I'm going to come back and answer any individual questions you have. I'm going to remain online until 12 noon. So I'm going to be here from 11:01 until 12 noon. But I'm going to switch off my camera and my mic for 3 minutes, and I'm going to turn off the recording now.